2 years of border restrictions soon at an end. Now Taiwanese are flooding travel agencies with calls, eager to travel overseas once more. Battling inflation. Taiwan's central bank raises interest rates again, but what does it mean for people's finances? Southern Taiwan sees a flood of tourists after last weekend's earthquake forces many to change their travel plans. And Taiwan Sign Language gives the hard of hearing a voice on TV and in the classroom. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Taiwan announced on Thursday that it is planning to lift all quarantine rules for international arrivals in mid-October. That set off a surge in interest among locals for travelling overseas. Eric Gao takes a look.
After being cooped up for more than 2 years, people in Taiwan are ready to get away. The government announced that it plans to end mandatory COVID-19 quarantine for international arrivals in mid-October. Without having to spend days in isolation after a trip, people are now inundating travel agencies with calls.
今天观察一下我们的一个机票的一个搜寻量来看，那已经比昨天大概有成长1倍以上了。
Some airlines are offering huge discounts to attract passengers, with one selling one-way tickets to popular destinations like Japan and South Korea for less than $3 US. But those aren't the only spots on travelers' radar.
日本的一个自由行跟团体，其实我们都有做包机的准备，包含韩国。那再来就是最近比较夯的米兰跟慕尼黑。其实今天公告我们的电话，光我们公司的话就已经成长快15%左右。
But ending quarantine rules in Taiwan doesn't mean the pandemic is over. Some 20 companies are planning to roll out specialized travel insurance packages before the end of the year. A reminder that while people enjoy their holidays abroad, they still need to be careful of their health. Patrick Chen and Eric Gao for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's COVID mask mandate will stay in force until at least the end of the year. That's according to the country's Epidemic Response Task Force. The restrictions will stay despite Taiwan lifting quarantine requirements from mid-October. The task force said that maintaining the mask mandate would be safer as the winter season approaches. Taiwan will also hold nationwide local elections in late November. Tens of thousands of new COVID cases have been reported every day so far this week. The decision means people in Taiwan will be expected to continue wearing a mask in most public places.
这波疫情之后，我们可能会进入一个社区低度流行的一个状态。那社区低度流行的状态可能会持续到年底。那每一天能够会确诊的数量，我们现在没有办法估计。但是我们不希望说，因为这个口罩的这个解除，那又让这个疫情再起来。
Taiwan's central bank on Thursday raised the country's key interest rate for the third time this year. The latest rate hike of 12.5 basis points shows that inflation is still a major concern in the country, but the increase is not as large as the US Federal Reserve's hike of 75 basis points on Wednesday. Inflation is not as high in Taiwan as it is in the US and Europe. The central bank also warned that the global economic downturn will hit Taiwan's exports. It dropped its economic growth forecast for this year to just over 3.5%. It predicts economic growth will be even lower next year. To find out more about Taiwan's rate increase, our reporter James Chater spoke to Gary Ng, an analyst at Natixis Research in Hong Kong.
Explain for us how the interest rate hike is going to impact everyday Taiwanese and their businesses.
There are basically two major important implications. On the first one, basically it is about household debt. Because of this high interest rate environment and also the tightening liquidity, basically it means that a household can actually face higher pressure when they basically try to repay their debt, especially if we look at what happened in the last 2 years after the pandemic. We see that home prices has ballooned in many cities. Basically, it means that the accumulated household debt to GDP ratio has probably increased to above 90% in 2021. And on the other hand, if we think about the external environment in terms of export, all of this can actually act a bit negative towards the Taiwanese export and production or the related sectors, simply because the global demand may not be so strong.
Taiwan's rate increases aren't as high as in some other parts of the world. Explain for us why that is and what that reveals about Taiwan's position in the global economy.
Taiwan actually is a market that is quite lucky, which is a kind of exempt from some of these direct factors. But still, it is still being impacted by the global prices surge, such in commodities, in food, and etc. But still, if we look at it from the general perspective, the inflationary pressure in Taiwan is still a bit lower than many of the other developed economies in the world. So with that in mind, basically, the Taiwanese central bank doesn't really need to hike rate as aggressive as many other central banks in the world.
The central bank also revised down Taiwan's GDP growth forecast for this year. Are you pessimistic about the coming months for Taiwan's economy?
Definitely, the pressure on the Taiwanese economy is mounting more rapidly than ever in the past few years. But going forward, there are indeed a few risks that Taiwan will face. The first, which is also the most important, is the weakening global demand because of the weaker consumer spending around the world because of high interest rate. That will have an impact on Taiwan export because simply global consumers will not be buying as many products as before from Taiwan. The really silver lining will lie on whether Taiwan would be able to reopen as quick as possible, which is in line with many other Asian countries around the region to actually boost its consumption.
2 U.S. lawmakers have introduced a bill that would expedite arms transfers from the U.S. to Taiwan. It's called the Accelerating Arms Transfers to Taiwan Act and would make Taiwan eligible for priority delivery of defense materials. It would also authorize the creation of a war reserve stockpile on Taiwan. The lawmakers said the bill is needed so that Taiwan can be prepared for a potential invasion from China, quote, before it was too late. The new bill comes after the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee last week passed the Taiwan Policy Act, which would provide Taiwan with $6.5 billion for arms purchases if it becomes law. Taiwan's cabinet has passed draft amendments to legislation governing outside labour and visits by prisoners. This follows the fatal stabbing of 2 police officers by an inmate who had failed to return to his minimum security facility after a family visit. The revisions to the Prison Camp Act require that an inmate serve at least 1/3 of their sentence before becoming eligible for leave, up from 2 months. The list of convictions banned from minimum security prison will also be expanded to include violent crimes punishable with sentences of 10 years or more. These include robbery, kidnapping, human trafficking, and domestic abuse. 49 inmates have escaped from minimum security prisons in Taiwan over the past 10 years, one of whom is still on the run. Sunday's 6.8 earthquake in eastern Taiwan has dealt a blow to the scenic region's tourism industry. As John Van Trieste reports, damaged transport links and worries about aftershocks have sent travellers changing plans and flocking to a different part of Taiwan instead.
From across Taiwan, tourists are pouring into the tropical resorts of the far south. For many, the decision to come was a last-minute one. Many originally planned to visit the dramatic East Coast, where autumn is now getting underway. But Sunday's earthquake toppled bridges and cut rail links in the region.
原本是明天到台东，然后后天到花莲，后来就是只能绕回来这样。
因为地震的关系。
对，就火车没有开啊。
Boats headed to Xiaoliuqiu Island, a snorkeling and diving hotspot on Taiwan's southern coast, are packed.
就怕很多余震啊，就来到小琉球参加，过来玩一下，改一下行程这样。之后我们还会往花莲的地区去玩啊。
Here, the surge in visitors has been especially noticeable. It's a windfall for the island's tourism sector.
其实蛮多那种散客啊、临时的团，因为地震的关系，所以他们都改来小琉球玩。
But even in other parts of the south, where hotels were already nearly booked, busloads of tourists diverted by the earthquake are pouring in. The East Coast severed rail line could take months to repair, and some road links will also need rebuilding, meaning that the shift in tourism to the south could be a lasting one. Alex Chen and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Eastern Taiwan is still in recovery mode following Sunday's 6.8 earthquake. But is another earthquake of similar size likely in the near future? To find out, John Van Trieste spoke with Chen Dai, chief of the Central Weather Bureau's Seismological Center.
Fortunately, the earthquake happened at eastern Taiwan because the rock is so solid at that site. And fortunately, at that site is not so high population over there, so the damage is not so high. But we are very worried about when earthquake occur in the western Taiwan, especially the earthquake with very shallow depths. Then there will be a large damage over western Taiwan. We have a high population in western Taiwan, and many buildings is very old. We have many old apartments with maybe 40 or 50 years old building over there. So another problem is western Taiwan is relatively softer than the eastern Taiwan.
Is a 6.8 earthquake likely to happen in western Taiwan? You mentioned that the east is where two tectonic plates meet. But what about in the west? Is an earthquake of that size possible or likely?
Oh, yes, it's possible and likely. Yeah. Over the 10 or 20 years, we have about 1 or 2 magnitude larger than relativity to 6 or larger than 6. I remember maybe 2013 in the central Taiwan, we have 2 magnitude around 6.0 in the Nantou city. And according to the Jiji earthquake in 1999, we have magnitude 7.3 over there also as well. For now, we are afraid of the southwestern Taiwan, like the Tainan area. We think the earthquake recurrence period is almost 100 years, and we have a large earthquake just 100 years ago. So maybe right now is the period is right now. We maybe will face a large earthquake in southwestern Taiwan.
Taiwanese and Czech officials have signed a memorandum of understanding aimed at boosting ties between Taiwan's semiconductor industry and the Czech Republic. The Czech delegation of officials and academics is currently in Taiwan on a 6-day visit. At the ceremony, the delegation also signed MOUs on education, university exchange programs, and museum partnerships. Ties between the Czech Republic and Taiwan have warmed over the past year. The Speaker of Taiwan's legislature visited Prague in July. Russia has seen a surge in one-way flights out of the country and long queues at land borders. Traffic at the Russia-Georgia border surged after President Vladimir Putin ordered a partial mobilization of citizens to fight in his invasion of Ukraine. One-way flights out of Russia also rocketed in price and sold out fast. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, who has been overseeing large military gains against Russia in his country's east, said the mobilization had made the war very real for millions of Russians.
Російське рішення про мобілізацію – це відверте визнання, що їхня кадрова армія, яку десятиліттями готували до загарбання чужого, не витримала і посипалась. І тепер через мобілізацію війна Росії проти України для більшості громадян Росії – це не щось там на ТБ чи в інтернеті, а те, що зайшло в кожний російський дім.
Taiwan is home to its own sign language, a blend of the sign languages used in Japan, China, and even some local innovations found nowhere else in the world. Today, on International Day of Sign Languages, we meet some people bringing this language to the fore. John Van Trieste reports.
Chen Yuyi's classroom is completely silent, and that's with good reason. Chen is giving a lesson in Taiwan Sign Language, which is like no other language in the world. As of September, both deaf and hearing students can now choose it as a second language. and Chen is one of nearly 70 deaf teachers ready to teach them. Some of her fellow deaf teachers had a few last-minute nerves as the school year got underway.
I need to teach 1st, 2nd, and 3rd grade. I feel a bit awkward because I'm deaf and don't know phonetic symbols. What am I supposed to do? I'll just have to collect some picture cards and give them to the students to look at. Some things will take longer to explain.
But another deaf primary school teacher, Chen Zhirong, says being deaf is an advantage.
Being deaf is an advantage for the deaf teachers. Natural sign language is our mother language. Deaf teachers have better sign language skills than hearing teachers. They have to observe how other teachers hold their classes and make students interested in sign language.
It isn't just deaf teachers who are bringing Taiwan Sign Language to a broader audience. At public television service, a group of dedicated presenters has been signing the news for 20 years. One of the anchors is Mike Nyo.
Our program is completely designed for a deaf audience, and we use sign language. Many people tell me that there's little news related to the deaf community in most TV news. But sign language news broadcasts a lot of news involving deaf people, so they can understand what is happening and how it impacts their rights.
For Mike, the toughest part of the job is translating written Chinese into Taiwan Sign Language. He says the two languages can be very different.
Sometimes the Chinese can be vague. We have to look into what it really means and use sign language to convey that meaning. Also, for example, politicians often use very vague language or political speak. I have to think of how to convey the meaning in a neutral way using sign language.
But he says the rewards are great. He remembers a time when deaf people were often excluded from public life, particularly during elections.
When candidates gave speeches, there were no sign language interpreters next to them. Deaf people weren't able to understand what the candidate was saying. But we need to know, so we brought this up. And the Central Election Commission agreed to have interpreters' frames take up 1/3 of the TV screen.
And while there have been bumps along the way, Mike says the government is learning, and it's serious about giving deaf people equal access to information.
In the past, deaf people would complain that when there was a sign language interpreter, there would constantly be people passing inside the interpreter's frame on the TV screen, or it would be blocked by the news ticker. Seeing that the ticker blocked the interpreter, the government moved them higher on the screen, so the captions and ticker wouldn't block them.
Mike says that offering sign language in all of Taiwan's schools will help the language bridge the divide between deaf and hearing people, and that in turn will lead to greater understanding.
今天我想要荡秋千，还有时间。
觉得透过这堂课，我可以更加了解到那些需要使用手语才能沟通的人的感觉是什么样子。
Once a language only used by the deaf community, Taiwan Sign Language is growing in visibility on television, at press conferences, and now in the classroom, putting it on par with all of the many spoken languages of Taiwan. Damon Lin and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Police in New Taipei and Tainan have busted human trafficking rings amid a crackdown on scammers holding Taiwanese captive in Cambodia. Officers in New Taipei's Shizi district nabbed the leader of a fraud ring and 2 accomplices, confiscating mobile phones, passports, account books and other evidence. Police say they have stepped up operations to shut down the syndicates, which have forced hundreds of Taiwanese to work in telecom scam networks in Southeast Asia. Down south in Tainan, police busted another trafficking gang.
那本分局日前发现一处疑为人口贩运集团作为面试、招募、诱骗国人前往柬埔寨的据点。那随即报请台南地检署指挥侦办。那该集团在网络上以至柬埔寨担任打字员，月薪高达新台币10万等等的条件，诱骗同学、朋友应征面试。
Employees at the China Steel Express Corporation in southern Taiwan's Kaohsiung say they are fighting for their rights after the company retaliated against whistleblowers. The shipping company's union says sailors have had their pensions docked and work withheld after reporting violations of the Labour Standards Act to the Bureau of Labour Insurance. The Kaohsiung city government says pension disbursements fall under the Ministry of Labour and complaints they receive are passed on to the central government. China Steel Express denies it is withholding work from whistleblowers. The port city's Labour Affairs Bureau says it will invite both sides to mediate a resolution and determine whether the Seafarer Act or Labour Standards Act applies to these employees. When you think of diplomacy, you probably picture government officials shaking hands and signing deals. But a recent Taiwanese delegation visited Palau armed with musical instruments and acrobatic skills. Our reporter Sandy Cheese met up with one of these young ambassadors to find out how Taiwan is deepening ties with one of its few diplomatic remaining allies.
A Taiwanese folk song played on one of the oldest known Chinese instruments. This isn't just a performance, it's the sound of diplomacy. Ko Kai has been playing the shum for 10 years. Not only has he been working to master the instrument, he has also been using his rare talent for a greater aim.
像我们其实表演的歌曲，就是跟算是台湾一个非常有名的，已经算是经典。 所以我们希望能够透过演奏这些经典，然后把台湾的一些，不管是精神或者是我们的，透过我们的动作，然后去演奏的方式，然后跟传达的一些风格感情，然后传达给全世界，告诉我们台湾就是这么棒的一个国家。
Ke is one of the 40 young people who were selected as a youth ambassador from a pool of over 350. Their mission, to help the world learn more about Taiwan. And it's a vital mission too, at a time when China is pressuring the world not to recognize Taiwan as a country. Today, Taiwan only has 14 official diplomatic allies left. Each ambassador is armed with a unique skill. Some, like Ke, are musicians. Others are language experts. And some of them are even acrobats. They are showcasing the diversity of Taiwan. Before they set off on their journey, they get a pep talk from the foreign minister himself.
I know that young people can always make a change and also make a difference. I hope this program will give you a better understanding of the importance of diplomacy to Taiwan and become an important member in promoting our country in the international community.
This year's youth ambassadors visited the Pacific island nation of Palau. Like Taiwan, it's a small island that's eager to connect with the rest of the world.
I think youth ambassadors from Taiwan is a very important part of Taiwan as an independent nation, as a society, to expose Taiwan to other different countries around the world. So I believe like Taiwan, like a person, should have more friends from abroad and invite more foreigners to come and live and visit Taiwan.
When they arrive in Palau, the youth ambassadors are greeted by local students singing a familiar Taiwanese pop song.
听说他们其实练了这一首歌已经练了2个月，不是练中文2个月，而是单纯练这一首就练了2个月。对，其实认为他们在这方面付出的努力是不可以被抹灭的。
After an intense 5-day trip in Palau, performing, promoting Taiwan, and making friends, Ke says his perspective on Taiwan's diplomatic efforts has changed.
去之前，其实我觉得台湾在现在这样的处境下， 这样外交处境下，我觉得其实还需要再更进一步去跟国外打开一些管道去交流。然后在我参加这个交流计划结束后，我觉得其实台湾是真的有在努力想要跟所有国家去做进一步的交流。透过这个方式，我觉得我们比较年轻一辈的青年，我觉得我们其实可以透过参加这种进化，去让国外的一些小朋友认识我们，然后等到其实未来之后，这些小朋友也长大之后，他们会更记得我们台湾给他们的所有一切，给他们的所有一些帮助，跟我们的一些朋友的情谊，我觉得这些都是可以被长久留下来的。
Ko says that Palau has left a deep impression on him, and so has its president.
其实帛琉的总统他真的很亲民，他不太会忌讳我们任何的动作。然后再来，其实由于他其实身高很高，然后我们有些人想跟他比一个什么爱心，然后比爱心的时候，他其实就会因为我们身高稍微比较矮，他就会甚至可以整个蹲下来，然后跟我们一起比。
So while diplomacy often involves meetings with government leaders, as Taiwan's youth ambassadors have discovered, there are even more memorable ways to make friends in the international community. Sometimes all it takes is a selfie. Klein Wong and Sandy Chi for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching Taiwan Plus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Finally, we leave you with images of Fushoshan Farm, which is located high in the mountains of central Taiwan, with autumn in full swing. The vibrant fall colours are a stark contrast to the rest of the country. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the Taiwan Plus app. Stay safe and see you next time.